Ja sam Bilja Bogavac u ime ženske mreže, Evropske ženske mreže protiv seksualnog zlostavljanja. Sve vas pozdravljam, zahvaljujem Zafiri što će danas da bude sa nama i da predstavi svoje predavanje, da verujem da ćemo u tome uživati i puno naučiti. Zahvaljujem se ženskoj sobi koja je omogućila da sve ovo funkcioniše i Zoom i prevod i našim prevoditeljicama Radmili i Ani, gde uvek moram da kažem da njih nema, ne bi ni ovo sve funkcionisalo kako treba. Tako da, Zafira, izvolite, evo, tu smo sada, pa će se uključivati kako dolazi.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. A warm welcome to you all. Some of you I've met, some of you I've not had the opportunity of work with, so I'm really looking forward to that this afternoon. Just to give a little bit of background about myself and what brings me here. I am by profession a social worker. I worked many years working with children and families, mainly children and their parents and communities. And during that time, I had a lot of opportunities to work with children and women that had been sexually abused, had experienced sexual violence and domestic violence as part of that work. I delivered therapeutic interventions to children, particularly post-abuse recovery work, one-to-one work as well as group work. And then I moved into the field of training, worked for social care, social services, training services for a long time, and then joined the NSPCC about 25 years ago as a senior consultant. So there my role was designing, delivering training, and also offering a consultancy service as part of that charity. So you may have heard about the NSPCC. It's a UK-based charity that works exclusively with children who have experienced abuse in all forms. Currently, I'm an independent worker, so I work freelance, semi-retired, trying to find time to enjoy my time with my grandchildren and work in the community on a voluntary capacity. So I still do some work with women who have been experienced sexual and domestic violence, and that's in a voluntary setting. So really feel that having that foot in practice is really important for me. But thank you and welcome. I guess the topic that we have today is going to be really, really important for everybody. My guess is that some of you will be supervisors and some of you will be supervisees. And the training will be relevant to all of you. So those who are managers and supervisors, I would like you to engage from that perspective. What can I take away that will support my practice in delivering supervision to my team, my staff, and my organization? And for those who are supervisees, if you can engage and think about what can I expect from my manager for good quality, effective supervision, something that will support me and my practice. So can I just have a show of hands? How many supervisors do we have in the room? Or a symbol? Thank you. So quite a few supervisors. Thank you. So and I guess.
Sorry, and also Mariana from Women's Room. I think that she just finished her counseling session, therapeutical session, so she will join us also.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's say a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. So it's a brief overview of supervision. I will work through defining supervision. We will look at some of the reasons why it's important to have supervision. What is it about our work, our practice, working with children, women who have experienced violence? What is it about that work that makes it essential that we have supervision? We look at some of the core functions of supervision and how we manage some of those different parts of supervision to ensure that we're covering the organisation's responsibilities, we're covering professional responsibilities, and also responsibilities for our supervisees. It's an interactive opportunity, so there's time for reflection, and I will encourage you to think about what exercise this is, what does it mean for my practice, and hopefully engage with me and each other. Lots of opportunities to ask questions. We can ask questions during the presentation, and we can ask questions at the end. So I will leave that up to people on how they want to kind of engage. A little bit about how we work together. The session is being recorded and will be shared on the website. So it's really important that we bear that in mind when we share information about ourselves, information about our supervisees and our organisations. Reflecting on experience and bringing that into the forum is a really, really valuable way to learn. So, you know, at points I'll be asking you to input with what are your thoughts, your views, and your experience in that area. I appreciate that the relationships that are presented here may present a manager and a supervisee relationship. So please be mindful of that and respect each other's perspectives, views, and ideas and thoughts about the topic. It's also a very emotive topic. You know, we will know through work with women, children who have experienced abuse, that it can touch us in different ways. When we are talking about supervision, that will also touch us in different ways. It's likely that we have had positive experiences, but there is also a possibility that we have had difficult experiences. The other point is to bear in mind principles for working with diversity, with inclusive practice. That might be the people that we work with, our organisations, but a recognition also that the communities that we work with may present with a difference. That difference can be a race, a culture, can be a disability, it can be around sexuality. So as you engage with the material, do think about you know, the different types of people, women, children, organisations we come into contact with. I've already said it's an interactive course, but there is no obligation to engage. I'd like you to each take your own responsibility for your learning, how much you want to share and what you want to share. So at this point, any questions? Okay, so I'm going to invite you just to reflect for a moment on your career and all the different jobs that you have done. How much of that perspective is hooked on some of your feelings around your managers and the relationships with your managers? How much of that does it link with that, whether they were positive or negative? Just to have a think about that. So I know in my career, I have had lots and lots of different jobs. I've worked in voluntary organisations, I've worked in statutory organisations. And one of the things that has determined whether I stay and carry on working in those organisations has been the quality of supervision and the relationship that I have had with managers. And I guess that will be the same for you. There are jobs that I have left because I've not been happy with the manager, the relationship that I have with the manager and the team. And the jobs that I've stayed in longest, I've felt valued, I felt supported through supervision in completing my tasks for my work with children and families. So an important part of that is, you know, thinking about how important and valuable supervision is, but how much it can influence us in the way that we perceive, support, whether we stay in a job or whether we move on. So let's begin with a definition of supervision. So it's important to say that there is no agreed definition of supervision. There is no agreed model of supervision. There is a range of definitions, whether you are from health, whether you're from social care, whether you're from a voluntary NGO section. Everybody will have a different definition of supervision. So I'm going to present. Yeah. Yes. No, that's fine. That's fine. I was going to present it. So one of the ones that I want to talk about is this definition. So this definition is by Kadishan and Harkness. And this definition focuses on the process of overseeing, directing, coordinating, enhancing, and evaluating the on-job performance of workers whom the supervisor is responsible for. So this particular definition highlights that it's a process. A process is usually linked with a relationship. There's an emphasis on that. And there's also emphasis on the quality. And more importantly, about the competence of the worker to undertake their job. So it's very much linked with some of the tasks of supervision. So does this mirror some of the definitions you have? Yeah, lots of nods, thank you. So another definition is by the late Toni Morrison. He passed away about 5 years ago, but a leader in the field of supervision in social care organisations. This is probably the one that is most used in the UK. It underpins social work practice, it underpins health practice, and it supports a particular model that I will talk about a little bit later on, about how we kind of engage with people. Again, some key things have been highlighted here. One is that it's a process, so it's something that is worked on, built on, develops over time, not an one-off event. The other thing that's key to this definition, that it talks about the organisation, it talks about the professional, and it also talks about personal kind of needs. It's very difficult in our line of work to separate the person from the professional, because the work that we do is very much guided by our values, by our principles, by the use of professional judgment, and it draws on experiences that we have of being with children and families, and we bring that to our work. So this definition does not separate that, and it would argue that without focusing on the person and the personal aspects, it would be difficult to be effective. The other thing that this definition draws us is the focus on service users. So some research, a lot of research actually in practice experience will tell you that there is a direct link of the quality of supervision a professional receives to their practice and the quality of that practice. In the UK, we have what we call practice reviews. So they are undertaken when a child has died or there has been a significant incident. And the person who is managing the serious case reviews, practice reviews, will meet people. They will look at what went wrong, what can we do differently, what learning can we take away from this particular case. And one of the things that they look at is the quality of supervision that the practitioners received when they were engaging with the children and families. And quite often it's been highlighted that there has been a direct link. So one of the probably most noted case review was a child called Victoria Klimby. Don't know if anybody heard of Victoria Klimby. Very long time ago, but the serious case review really talked about the lack of supervision that was there for the practitioner who was involved in the child's and their family work. The supervision that the practitioner had was of poor quality. There was no direction. When the practitioner was worried about what they were seeing, trying to understand, there was nobody to talk through some of those issues and help that practitioner. So a direct link there to the quality of supervision, to the practice that children and families experience. The other thing that we have to be mindful of, and what makes our type of supervision different, is the work that we're involved. In our day-to-day work, we are dealing with sexual violence, physical violence. We hear stories of people who come to us. We sit and listen, and we connect with lots of different ways to those children. So I'm just going to invite you to just read what's on that slide and think about the children, women that you've worked with, and think about the kind of things that stop them telling us about their experience of abuse. Just take a moment to think about that. And when you're ready, either put in chat or just share with me, what are the kind of things that get in the way of children telling us about abuse? What can you draw on from your practice? Thank you. Shame, fear, access to professionals, absolutely. Any other things?
Da, raspašće se porodica. To je isto strah od toga da će završiti negde najčešće kod nas počinilac koji preti da će dete da završi u nekom domu za decu bez roditeljskog staranja. Kad govorimo znači o deci, znači rekli smo strah i krivica, ali to je taj neki praktični moment da će se raspasti porodica i da će deca biti krive, da će biti smeštena negde van porodice i da će taj neko ko je počinio nasilje da završi u zatvoru, na primjer. Evo, to je još.
Absolutely, absolutely. So a lot of things there, and some of the things that have been highlighted in chat, the ones that I can read. Janetta has put, they have a feeling that nobody will believe them, a real fear of people making judgments about their experiences, and shame, fear, and not knowing who to go to for accessing any support. So I've just been prepared, and some of the things that I know from my work that children and young people have said that gets in the way from telling. Most of what we know, certainly about sexual abuse, has come from adult survivors who have not been able to share things when they've been young and children. So as adults are able to tell us the kind of things that formed a block and a barrier for them. So some of these things have already been covered, and I'll talk to some of the ones that are there. So a real sense of fear, shame in some of the research was prevalent for nearly 95% of the statistics that came through, a powerful factor, silencing factor. Sense of guilt, children thinking that they've been responsible for the abuse, that they instigated it. For some children, it was normal. This is what happened in our families. They didn't feel or know or understand that it was wrong. A fear of getting it wrong. What if I've made a mistake? What if this person didn't do what they did? Think about disabilities, how they might get in the way of communicating what's happened to them. The sense of loyalty that they may have to their abuser is also a very powerful one, particularly for those children who've been abused by people they know and trust. That the sense of loyalty is very, very powerful. If it's your father, your mother, somebody really close, you have that dichotomy of abuse. You feel that you have to express loyalty. It also impacts on children's attachment to their carers. Children have to attach to survive. So it's more likely that they will blame themselves than they will blame other people or children, other children. Not being believed was a powerful one, a sense that if they did tell anybody, that they wouldn't be believed, they wouldn't be taken seriously. Is there anything missing from these that you thought about? Do they mirror a lot of your experience? What about for women? Would there be anything different here for women? I would guess very similar ones. And one of the things that are there that I haven't mentioned, a real fear of racism, of sexism, of homophobia, that they will be blamed as a victim, they will be held responsible, and disableism, that this has happened to you because you're disabled, a real sense of some of those things that we also have to kind of think that for some communities, some children, some families, these things will be impacting on their ability to tell. So let's look at professionals. Just take a moment and just think about what might stop professionals from taking action. What might get in the way of them taking any action if they become aware of abuse? So again, put it in chat, share from your experience. Are there very similar things? Are they different things?
Fear also, and not knowledge about the topic.
Yes, yeah. So not knowing that it's abuse, that they haven't had any education or any training.
Or what to do next.
Or what to do. They don't know what to do, absolutely. And if they have experienced something themselves, if this has been a feature of their childhood, they may think that this happens, it's normal, this kind of things happen. It's a taboo, we don't discuss it, we don't recognize it. Absolutely. What other things might stop adults, professionals?
Ja mislim da isto ima, da je kod nas, govorim ovde, ono što se možda ne govori, ali jeste da se ne veruje deci, da je taj deo kad deca to izgovore, da se jednostavno ne veruje, kako je to moguće. I vrlo često u tom neverovanju dece, ono što kažu deca, da se onda odmah optuže majke, da su majke te koje su zapravo instruirale da deca kažu to. Mislim da je ono osnovno da se jednostavno ne veruje deci koliko god pričamo da verujemo deci.
Absolutely. And the same there could be for adults. They might think that as a professional, if I tell somebody that this has happened to this child, that I might not be believed, I might not be taken seriously. And is it Janetta? Have I pronounced that properly? Janetta's put in the chat that she was blamed by a former colleague. So that can also be a feature that if as adults we've tried to tell somebody or we've reported somebody in a powerful position, that we often get blamed for causing trouble, for causing problems, causing difficulties. And if that has happened once, it is likely that we won't do it again. Because if we get a difficult or a bad reaction from people, then we're not likely to tell people. Absolutely. Thank you. Krista's just mentioned there an ability to properly safeguard the victim. So the victim is not ready to take action. They don't want to take things forward, and that puts you in a very difficult kind of position. We are encouraged as practitioners to work in partnership with children, with families. So there's a sense that we have to gain their consent. If we are to tell the police or any other services, that we have to gain their consent to take those things forward. And they can also form a barrier. So again, I've just prepared a slide just to capture some of those things there. So we mentioned a fear for family, fear for self. If you are working and living in the same community, there's a real sense that I will lose my friends, I will lose my family, I will lose value from where I work, and I will be blamed. I will be blamed for taking action to protect children. They are powerful motivators to silence us. That if whatever a child or a woman is describing, it triggers memories for me about what happened. And it's a difficult place, and I don't want to go there. So that can also be a barrier. A real fear of not wanting to lose your job, if you're reporting a colleague or a manager in your position. And a real fear of getting it wrong. Lily, you mentioned, being taken into care, for example, breaking down the family. So professionals understand that children in care have a very, very difficult life. They understand that they are extremely vulnerable in those situations. The professionals start weighing up the consequences. So a real fear of, well, I might damage this child, I might damage the family. They will go into care, they'll have no family. And which is worse? Which is worse, that the fact that they should stay here with their family or be taken into care. Fear of reprisals, loyalty to the family. If it's a colleague, somebody you're close to, it'll form a massive barrier for you to take any action. And then how will it reflect on my race, my culture, my sexuality? I remember as a social worker, it was a huge factor for me. Some of people I was working with, my colleagues, would say that that's something that happens in your families. It's part of your religion, it's part of your culture. So they wouldn't take my concerns seriously. And then within my own communities, it was difficult because it was still a taboo. So I would get told, you're breaking down the family, you're breaking down the community, you're telling lies, this doesn't happen in our families. So, all those things impact on professionals and their ability to tell us things. The best place to deal with some of these thoughts, these feelings, is going to be supervision. This is where we explore some of those things to free up our practitioners from dealing with some of these strong feelings and thoughts. Supervision is also a place where we will get supported through the process of supporting a survivor, through the process of the investigation, and that's where we will seek support. That's also somewhere where we can be challenged, where practice can be challenged. We can be prompted to think differently about things, the importance of thinking about the consequences of getting it wrong and focusing on the consequences of getting it right, and thinking about those kind of aspects. From a child survivor or a victim's perspective, what happens is that they are not only dealing with their own barriers and their own difficulties, but they're also contending with the barriers of a professional. So you can see that it compounds what children are carrying. It compounds some of those feelings, those strong feelings that are present, and it further silences those children and stops them from seeking help. A very powerful visual slide, I think, because you see everything that children have to contend with. And often this is something that children carry inside and will manifest in their behavior, which is often presented as very challenging behavior. So we then move into victim blaming, or we focus on all the things that the child is presenting, whether that's challenging behavior or whether that's risky behavior. And we move away from seeing the child and their experiences of abuse. And any comments or questions? So the other thing we know is that the work that we are involved in is very anxiety provoking. That's the word I'm looking for, sorry. So it's a given that if we are dealing with women and children who've been abused, we are dealing with perpetrators who have harmed children and women, and we are working with communities, that there will be a high level of anxiety. It is not easy work to deal with. It's work that sometimes stays with you when you go home. It's sometimes very challenging work. You are having to deal with different perceptions of people. So it's a given that it's that you can get anxious and you can have strong feelings that are impacting on you. And Vince and Martin offer this diagram to explain the role of anxiety for learning. And what they argue that anxiety is good. It is normal when we are faced with something that's difficult, something new, we get a little bit anxious. I may be going to a new job, I might be visiting a new family, and I will be thinking, what will they be like? Will they like me? What might I see? What if I tell somebody and they don't believe me? So all those things are quite healthy. They begin to question us and keep us on our feet. So that level of anxiety is normal. It helps us deal with uncertainty because a lot of our work is not certain. It's not black and white. It's not a science. So there's no single way of dealing with something or doing something. So it's a given that our work is dealing with a lot of uncertainty. Its practice is that's laden heavily with risk, and it's something that we have to find our way around. And there might be a little bit of struggle with some of the things that we experience, but generally we will see some insight, we will see some resolution, and with support we can begin to manage our anxiety. However, when things become a little bit much for us, we can move on to the red cycle of anxiety. And here this diagram explains is that if we are engaging with children and families impacted by a high level of anxiety that isn't supported or isn't managed, then we will move into our survival instincts. We will move into flight. We will move into fight or freeze. They are normal reactions to very difficult kind of situations. We may present with some defensive behavior to try and protect ourselves. We may deny that this is an issue or try and avoid it, or we may present as willful ignorance. Don't know, doesn't bother me, doesn't affect me, has got nothing to do with me. So I'm just going to invite you that have had experiences of managing and working with people, that any sharing of experiences of managing people who have been in fight, flight or freeze modes. What kind of behaviours might have you seen or experienced? Krista?
Ovo sve mi liči zapravo kao i na osjećanja koje ima dete koje je seksualno zlostavljano, da bi sve to preživelo. Tako da to je nešto što i mi primimo i mislim da su to nekako i normalne reakcije. Ono što znam da je meni bilo bitno u mom radu kad jesam sve ovo prepoznavala ili kad nisam prepoznala, da meni jeste supervizija pomogla da ove stvari nekako prepoznam, prihvatim i onda vidim šta ću sa njima. To je ono što je meni bilo važno. Ja sam imala ovaj deo koji jeste da se borim, da mislim neke stvari radim koje je bilo onda pitanje supervizije, da kad moram da stanem ili šta radim, tako da supervizija jeste meni bila važna za sve ovo. Sve sam prošla, lično sam prošla kroz sve ovo.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lily. Thank you. Krista, you had your hand up earlier.
Yes. I can think of an experience that I had from a time when I worked directly with sexual assault survivors, and there was a particular case where I was supporting, and she was an adult, but she had quite an pronounced intellectual difficulty. And one of the things that happened was she initially disclosed a sexual assault, and then it turned out that there had been multiple sexual assaults by a group of people that were connected. And it seemed that every few days or weeks, a new sexual assault would be disclosed to her mother. And her mother would call me in an absolute panic. And I think this was a time when I really went into flight and freeze, especially the flight. I became almost, I always really loved my work, but during this time, I hated my job. I would go into panic every time that I saw her number on my phone. It was quite difficult for me as a situation. And on reflection, I did not have adequate supervision at the time. My supervisor was less experienced in sexual assault than I was. So I think I was going at it alone quite a bit.
Yeah, they're very difficult times. I think one of the things that the examples you both presented, the important thing is that we begin to recognize it. We begin to recognize it and see support. The danger is then when practitioners don't recognize that this is impacting on them, and they will avoid, they will struggle through their work, and it can have really bad consequences because it affects it. It leads to poor practice. I was supervising somebody, and it was the first time they had dealt with a case of domestic abuse, and you know, in supervision, I was trying to encourage her to talk about what she saw and what she experienced. And she was able to talk a little bit about it, but then she moved to the different team. And then when she came back to me, I noticed that she hadn't been to see the family for a long time, and really had to work very hard with her. And it was evident from the work that she was in a flight mode, that every time it was time to visit that family, she would avoid it. She would find reasons not to go, or she would go off sick. Really, really powerful kind of things were impacting on her. And times where her previous manager directed her, said, look, you have to go and see the family. instead of knocking like that, she would knock, oh, nobody's in, I'm going home. So no attempts to see the child and the family. So, you know, you can see that, you know, it was leading to dangerous practice. There were children that we were concerned about, and we had a practitioner who was not making their regular visits to make sure that children and family was okay. So in the end, we were able to talk to her, and she connected it very much to her own experience of domestic abuse. She'd worked for a long time in the field, but she said she hadn't worked in a situation where there was a perpetrator there. So she was very fearful about what might happen there. And she felt she just felt that she wasn't able to manage the case as it was. And for me, her honesty and her openness was what was important, that she felt that she was able to say that and talk about those things. Because if you close off and you don't talk about those things, they know that it may be impacting on your practice, but there'll be no way of seeing and supporting people. But thank you for sharing those. So some of the things that we have to look out for is, are our supervisors operating on the green cycle of anxiety? Are they managing some of the difficult things that are coming up in their practice? And if they aren't managing very well, what are the signs that we might see in our interaction with them? Have we developed a relationship where they can be open and talk to us about things? Somebody not turning up for supervision would give you a good indication that they might be on flight mode, that it's too painful and too difficult to have supervision to talk about those issues. So as we're working with people, we have to get to know some of the signs, the indicators that might manifest in their behavior, so we can be alert to some of the things that might be impacting on them, and we can begin to support the person. So very, very useful cycle. The other thing is that if we are new to supervision ourselves, it is possible that we can also be affected by this cycle. So, you know, being mindful, reflecting on your own development, reflecting on things that you might struggle in supervision, and what are the signs that you're going to notice about yourself? What patterns of behavior will you see? We can all have one-off days. You know, I can have a day when I don't want supervision, I don't want to give supervision, and that's okay. It might be because I'm not feeling very well. It might be that I'm distracted by other things, but the worry is when it becomes a pattern. That's when you know that things aren't okay. That's when you know that either you as a supervisor need support or your supervisee will need support. So is anybody familiar with this? It's called the Child Sexual Abuse Accommodation Syndrome. Anybody seen this before, familiar with it? Yeah. Thank you, Maya. So Maya, I'm going to encourage you to share what you know about this.
Actually, what I know, it's kind of normal reaction to extremely abnormal situation when child abuse is long term and when the child doesn't see any way how to get out of it. And actually, it's a way how to survive, to split.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. A very, very good explanation. So the first two bottom layers have to be there to before a child is abused. They have to present as the groomer, the perpetrator, has to create a level of helplessness, and that's around their vulnerability. And they have to ensure that secrecy will be maintained in that situation. What can happen then, as Roland Summit has said, is I suppose that place that you're in, you start to feel very entrapped. You start to feel very helpless. It may mean that you reach a stage in your life where you're able to communicate that things are not okay. But quite often what happened to children was that the threats that had been made, like, you know, you're going to get your dad, your mum into trouble, you will break the family up, you will get us all into trouble, somebody will go to prison. They all start coming true, sadly. And so that is usually when a child will begin to kind of retract. I really like the model. It's called a syndrome, which has got a very medical emphasis, but I think it's a normal process and a reaction to a lot of children who are experiencing abuse. The model itself has been challenged because some people will argue that if a child retracts and says, actually, I got it wrong, this didn't happen to me, I lied, I made it up. What this model is saying, that it's usually a reaction of their abuse and the grooming process. However, from a legal sense, they will argue that if a child is saying it's not happened, it's not true, then why should we as professionals say that it is and it has happened? So just a little bit of background on its controversy. But I like the model. Most of children that I've worked with, I've seen go through this process. I have close friends that were now adult survivors, will explain that exactly this happened to them. A lot of children I worked with who have now grown up and are adults will say that the time when they did try to tell was usually when they were adolescents and they were teenagers, because they were exploring relationships, they were realizing that it's not okay, and there was a move to independence rather than dependency, and they were factors that supported them to not maintain the secrecy. So you're probably thinking, what's the relevance of this to supervision? So one of the first definitions that I put up was by Toni Morrison, and he talked about supervision from an organizational perspective, from a personal perspective, as well as a professional kind of perspective. Now we know the two examples that we've talked about earlier on are very related to the professional and the individual. However, how an organization supports its managers, how an organization supports its supervisees has a powerful impact on the way that they function and the way that they practice. And what Toni Morrison has done is use this model to look at what it might mean for people working in an organization. And he's called this model professional accommodation syndrome. So one of the things that he would say, that if an organization is one that doesn't recognize that the work that you're involved in is difficult, doesn't recognize that it has an impact on our thoughts, on our feelings, then we may move through this model as practitioners, as supervisors. So because it's not okay to say that you're struggling, it's not okay that we talk about things that are impacting on us, professionals then maintain a level of secrecy because they sense that it'll be perceived as a weakness if I tell somebody that I'm being affected, that I'm stressed with the work. It'll be seen as a weakness. Practitioners then move into feeling quite helpless. They have no one to turn to, no one to talk to about the difficult practices, difficult clients, service users they're in contact with. They can't talk about the impact of the work, whether that's sleepless nights, whether that's making them ill, whether that's impacting on their relationship with their family, their partners. If they can't talk about those things, the only way they're going to survive in that organization is to begin to accommodate it. So you normalize what's happening in that organization. We just do as we are told. We don't talk about the impact of the work on our feelings. We desensitize ourselves to the things that are happening around us. So we begin to do that. And where there have been opportunities to tell people, if the reaction has been, you've been doing this a long time, you shouldn't be feeling like this, can't understand why this is happening to you, why are you saying things like that, that it's likely that they will retract. They'll say, you're right, doesn't affect me, I need to be a stronger person, I need to be able to manage this and not let things affect me. So they very much get influenced by the professional accommodation syndrome. So again, can I just check if there's this resonates with you? Any experiences you wanted to share so we can just put it into kind of context? Have you seen it in people or in organizations? I have worked in these organizations, and they have a very powerful impact on you. And, you know, as I said earlier, you know, sometimes it's a relationship with your supervisor that makes you leave, but also an unhealthy, unsupportive organization can also mean that you don't stay. If you're not getting this kind of support that you need, then you won't stay. So, you know, I've worked in places where, you know, it's not okay to demonstrate a weakness. It's not okay to say, I don't know what to do, and I need help. And, you know, I knew I was in those organizations because I was getting very ill. I wasn't sleeping. I was abusing food. I don't drink, so I'm sure that if I was drinking, I would have probably reached for the bottle. But all those difficult times, and it took a friend that worked outside that organization that prompted me to leave. There's been organizations that I've had to challenge about my experiences there. And that in itself is a difficult stance to take. And, you know, if you put a grievance in about people and you've made complaints, then all those earlier feelings of victim blaming used to come into play. So very challenging kind of times. So just the model as a way for understanding that, you know, sometimes we can have good supervisors, we can have good practitioners, but the organization that we're in doesn't support effective supervision. It doesn't recognize some of the challenges of our practice. And in our line of work, there is nothing that will not impact on us. So I really like this quote. I'll give you a chance to have a read. It's unrealistic to expect that we won't be touched by the work that we're in. It's unrealistic to expect that we won't have feelings about what we see, what we hear, and what we experience. What we need is organizations and people to help us manage those feelings, talk about those feelings, and think about how they're affecting us professionally as well as personally.
Ja bih samo htjela kažem da na ovo sada da ja sam stvarno imala sreću što radim u organizaciji gde nije bilo ovako ovih situacija, jer mislim da smo upravo iz te želje da što bolje radimo sa klijentima vrlo brzo posle osnivanja centra imale superviziju, što je, mislim, bilo osnov za mnoga pitanja koja su nas mučila. Ali ono što ja jesam imala iskustvo u radu kao supervizorka zajedno sa Dušicom Popadić, da smo radili u organizacijama koje jesu se zaglavile bile u odnosu na ovo što smo malo prepričali i da su onda žene odlazile jednostavno. Nisu mogle da se izbore sa svim tim i onda su se te organizacije nažalost, koliko god su to su uglavnom bile ženske, feminističke, ali u jednom momentu je članstvo počelo da se osipa. Eto, to je ono što je moje iskustvo, da šta se dešavalo, da.
Thank you for sharing that. I have seen similar things, you know, when there's been a request for training, when there's been a request for some consultancy. I really have to explore with the organization, why do you want this consultancy? Why do you need this training? And it's often that they want you to fix their practitioners, stop them getting upset, stop them taking time off sick, stop them getting ill and blaming us. And, you know, the emphasis of my involvement with them had to shift to help them understand that the work that we're in is very difficult, that it's normal for people to be impacted on them. And people are burning out, they are getting ill and sick because they haven't got the right kind of support, not because they are failures as practitioners. And it's very hard to kind of see organizations like this, but they are there, and we have to think about that. If an organization doesn't support us to practice in a way that's going to support children and women, then we have to think about what kind of things need to be in place. An organization that promotes supervision, like the one you talked to, like the Centre, Lydia, will have policies in place. They will have training and support for managers. They will have a system where there is time allocated to provide supervision. They will recognize that there is a potential for burnout. There's a potential for people being touched by those experiences. They also have to recognize that a lot of people that are motivated by work in a caring center will have experienced things themselves. They want to make a difference to children, to women, based on their experience. So there's a high potential for being triggered by some of the work that you do. We'll talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to propose a short break. So if we can take 10 minutes break, have some time away from the screen, get a drink and coffee, and remember to turn your mics and cameras off and get a bit of break. So see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Bye, Zaffira.
Thank you. Bye. See you shortly. Thank you. Good to see you, Maya. How are you?
Okay, I feel a little bit tired and like I'm getting some, I don't know, what's the title? Not flu, something else than flu, but like I'm
coming down with something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a kid. She's 8. She's in the second grade. So every now and then she brings something from the classroom. So I'm just like,
yes, that's a problem. That's a problem. On my first face-to-face training, I worked with a group of 20 people, and I came home and I was very ill for 3 days. I didn't know what it was. I took a test. It wasn't COVID. But it just reminded me, you know, when children were going back to school and they'd bring back everything, and that's what it is. We protected ourselves from germs so long.
yes.
Yeah.
We are now not preparing for everything that's coming from school and the other things. We also had a training last week, 3 days training in some small town near Zagreb. And half of the group, it was a group of 27, and half of them were coughing all the time.
Oh, yes,
so both Anna and me just came back like...
You catch those germs. That's
That's
the thing about sharing.
Yes.
We share
sharing
people.
knowledge, sharing experiences, sharing germs, whatever.
Everything. Yeah. I'm hoping I can see a few people, but I know a lot of people haven't got their cameras on. So I'm going to make a start and hope we're most of us are back. Okay, so I just want to spend a little time focusing on the impact of the work, the potential impact of engaging with children, with women that have experienced sexual violence. It's a given that it is going to impact on us when you are working day to day with trauma, when you are alongside people on their journey with trauma, you're hearing about their experiences, you're hearing about recovery, you may hear new things that have come up. It's highly likely that we can get impact on that trauma, and often is described as vicarious trauma. Have you heard this term before? Yeah. And also sometimes referred to secondary traumatic kind of stress. And this can sometimes creep upon us without knowing, without understanding that we've impacted on those. So it's really important as practitioners, we become self-aware, self-reflective, and you know, take care of our well-being and see some of those kind of signs that we are stressed, we are traumatized by what we hear and see. It's also important for supervisors to also recognize this and look for some of the signs that might be there for practitioners who might be impacted by this in lots of different ways. I've got 2 examples that I remember had a very profound impact on me around secondary traumatic stress. So I was working as a social worker. I was very experienced. I had dealt with lots and lots of cases where children, women had experienced extreme violence. I had worked alongside the police to interview children, interviewed women. I had been in the court arena. So a lot of experience I was carrying. And I remember being allocated a case in my team, and my manager, he gave it to me and he said, read up on it, and then, you know, you can prepare to work with the 2 children. At the time, the children were a little girl who was 7 and a little boy who was 8. And they'd been in care for 4 years and their placement had broken down. So we were looking at another more suitable placement. And I remember sitting down reading this, and I started reading it. I kept going off to find different things to do, whether it was a cup of tea, whether, you know, finishing a job off, going to talk to another colleague. I felt myself just not wanting to read this. And then I began to read it. The children had experienced severe abuse, sexual violence. as well as neglect, and as well as emotional abuse. The boy had a disability as a result of his abusive experiences. And we had suspected sexual abuse, but it was never proven. We were never able to kind of clarify that. But as I was reading their story and I was listening to, well, I was reading what happened to them as children, I felt myself getting affected, very, very emotional. And then I carried on reading their story. The first foster family they were placed with, they were there for about 6 months, and social care got a call from the school and said that, no, but the children haven't been in for 2 days. And the social worker visited the home, they knocked, they saw 2 children looking out the window, and then they called the police because children wouldn't open the door. And they found the foster carer had died, had been dead for 4 or 5 days, and the children were locked in that room with them. So I was reading that and picturing what that might be like. I was trying to get a sense of what those children were going through, how difficult that must have been. And then the next occasion I opened another part of their file, and again another foster placement, and there were in the note files, there'd been lots of allegations of physical and sexual abuse over the time that had been investigated by staff and not proven. But eventually they were proven, and the children moved from that placement. Both children had been sexually abused by the foster carer. The female foster carer was aware of what was going on, and even reading that was a real struggle for me. And you've got to remember that I've worked in this field for such a long time, and I was kind of thinking, what's happening to me? I wasn't sleeping as I was reading the file. The next placement they moved to, that broke down because of physical abuse, and again, sexual abuse, and they were now in a children's home. But as I was reading it, it took me several days to read it. I couldn't engage with it. I couldn't understand why I was, sometimes getting very angry and snappy at the children, my own children, with family members. And then at other times, I'd be very emotional. I'd be watching a film, and the picture that I'd created of the children kept coming into my mind. I looked at my own children and felt incredibly sad, but guilty as well, because, my children were good, healthy, receiving really positive care. And I was feeling guilty for those children. And it surprised me, and it took a discussion with my manager to recognize that this was actually secondary traumatic stress, that it doesn't matter how long you've been working in the field, how experienced you are, how qualified you are, there is a potential to be impacted by the work that you do. In a similar way, and another colleague of mine, the organization I worked for had a practice space and the training base. So I was in the training base, and a colleague there who'd been my manager, a very experienced woman, had been my mentor, had been dismissed from the service for falsifying records. So, it's no name, so I can talk about this. The whole team were very, very shocked, couldn't understand what was happening here. Nobody could tell us what was going on because of the situation while it was being investigated. When the investigation was over, about a year after, I met with the practitioner, went out to have a coffee with her. And we were talking, and, she wanted to talk about it, I didn't, and we talked about it. And she described being in a situation, she'd come into the field because she was a survivor of domestic abuse. That was a known, it was a given. She'd worked in the field for a very long time, as I said, we kind of respected that. And what she described was that she went to visit a family, and there was something about the home that resonated to her. it started triggering memories of when she was young and when she was little. The house looked like the same. They had the same number of children that her and her siblings had. The parents just seemed to be very similar to what her experience was. And she said, I just remember not being myself in there. Every time I was in there and I wanted to ask a question, I would be sidetracked. I just could not engage with that family at all. And I was worried because I didn't understand why. So her manager and everybody in the team knew that she herself had been a victim of Survivor. One of the things that experience was telling her, and what it was triggering, was her childhood experience of living in a domestic violence situation, which she had long buried, wasn't aware of. And going into that family home and that event triggering for her meant that she couldn't work with that family, but she wasn't in a safe place to let anybody. And she said, every time I went to supervision, all my manager was concerned about, have the notes been done? Have the records been done? Have you spoken to the teacher? Have you spoken to their? So it was very task-driven. And she said, every time I tried to talk about some of the difficulties I was experiencing, I was closed down. And she'd made 3 visits and the records hadn't been kept up to date. So in the end, her manager said, you have to do the records because we need to, for quality assurance, it will be picked up. We will fail as an organisation. So she wrote in there that she'd visited when actually she hadn't visited. And an incident arose with the children and she had to own up of having not seen the children at that time. It was very, very sad because, you know, she was in a place where she couldn't say what was happening. She couldn't seek support for that. The other thing she said is that I was very, very experienced. People had respect for me. They knew me. I couldn't tell them that I was struggling here. I couldn't tell them that this was having an impact on me and triggering a memory that I'd buried a long, long time ago. She also talked about raising it with her family. Her parents were quite elderly and her siblings told her to pull herself together, that what she was remembering didn't happen. She was fabricating it. She'd been working with children that had been abused for too long, that she was seeing abuse everywhere. So it had a profound kind of impact on her. And, you know, if I look back, this is what was happening to her as well. The work that she was doing was triggering her in a way that she wasn't prepared for, that she needed somebody to help her understand. She needed somebody to explore what was getting in the way of her not visiting the family, instead of being pressured to put notes down that she had visited as a stop check. That could have been a very serious issue for the child. Luckily, the school were alert and were able to take action to protect the children. But in any case, you know, a family where there were high risks and high needs, 3 significant visits had been missed, and anything could have happened to those children and nobody would have known about it. So just an example of how we can get impacted by trauma that our clients, our service users are experiencing, and how they can powerfully kind of seep into our lives and what that might mean to us. I still get caught up in that memory when I talk about those children. I go back to those notes. And if you haven't met a child or a parent, then you start creating a picture in your mind. And those pictures for me became flashbacks. They came flashbacks at night. I would see those children. I would imagine them being in a situation in a bedroom where their parent, where the foster carer was dead, and they were just sitting around silenced by that, not knowing what to do. I was picturing what was that like for 4 or 5 days? How were they eating? Who was keeping an eye out for them? All those things just kept coming back to me and kind of shocked me. So we know it has a powerful impact on that. And as supervisors, we need to be aware of the impact of the work. We need to be aware of any signs and indicators of secondary trauma stress. And just have a look at what the research has said. It's an area of work that there's not been a great deal of research around in terms of impact. One of the difficulties is that often it's difficult to make a direct link with supervision and practice because there are so many variables within that. The type of work, the individual, their level of confidence, competence, all kind of come out. But just drawing on this particular study by Molnar and colleagues, where they were able to interview a range of professionals working in organisations where there had been sexual violence or domestic abuse or child abuse there. And some of this research tells us that women are at higher risk of vicarious or secondary trauma. Now, that can mean two things. What we know is that the service is dominated by women. So the research sample inevitably is going to include a lot of women in their kind of sample. We also know from statistics that women are more likely to be victims of sexual violence and domestic abuse than men are. So, you know, just to put that into a little bit of context. What the research also found was that professionals with childhood trauma were actually at higher risk. It's okay, okay. I didn't understand that. Were you talking to me or? Okay, right, okay. No, thank you, thank you. And also what emerged from that research was there was a lot of psychological symptoms, post-traumatic stress disorder, a sense of loss of trust in the world, you know, a development of very negative coping mechanisms, whether that was substance misuse, poor relationships, other kind of things. Intrusive images, something that I've just described that was happening to me, avoidance of places, and certainly that was something that was happening to my colleague. She could not visit this home because for her it was triggering painful childhood memories that she had buried a long time ago. So lots of different kind of triggers was there. There was an increased sense of cynicism and lack of sense of value, of personal identity. Who am I? What am I bringing? Am I competent? Can I do this work? And a real questioning of who you are and what you bring to that particular service. And as I said, you know, something that powerfully happened to me was a sense of guilt that was surrounded on being with my children and getting a sense that all children should be experiencing this and feeling very guilty about it. A sense of more mistrust of others and withdrawing from relationships that can happen both internally in an organisation, but also can impact on families and relationships outside the workplace. Statistics generally in organisations such as ours, there's a high level of exhaustion, there's a high level of staff turnover, and a high level of staff leaving, impacted on their ability to do their work, and also impacted on relationships with family, friends, in a negative way. I remember the first time, I was very young, I attended training around domestic violence. First time I'd had an opportunity to explore that. One of the ways that it really impacted on me is I started reflecting on my own relationship with my partner, and challenging and making that a difficult thing to deal with. So automatically it makes you do that. Some of the practitioners talked about a real fear for their own family's safety, a sense that there's all this badness out there. What will happen to my children? and being very overprotective about your own children, and cautious about who interacts with them, where they go, and who they with. I remember, you know, a lot of children were having sleepovers when my children were young, and I was okay about that. But then I realized that I very rarely allow my own children to go to sleepovers. And it wasn't until they said that to me, it's not fair that everybody can come here and we can't go anywhere, that I realized that I'd become overprotective because of the work that I was in. It was really impacting on the way that I managed my children and their safety. Another workplace factors that were linked to levels of VT and STS were a negative workplace. Some practitioners said that it increased their level of distress, and it was noted that there was a higher level of STS in those organisations. Sense of work overload, and having an autocratic leader was also something that was cited in the research. But not everything is negative, and what emerged from that particular research, that where there were positive workplaces, that staff felt supported, and where there was good, effective supervision, it meant that there was lower levels of vicarious trauma and secondary trauma, and post-traumatic growth was enabled within those organisations. Some practitioners felt strongly that their experiences of working with trauma had made them more resilient, made them more stronger in managing things. And then there was a term described as compassion satisfaction. So a real sense of worth, self-worth, self-importance, of being in a privileged position to help others. So these are some of the findings from research. How does that mirror your own workplaces? What's people's experiences been around vicarious trauma or secondary trauma?
I can say from my perspective as a coordinator of women's room, I think it's very important to have, first of all, on an organizational level, very high level of awareness about vicarious trauma and secondary traumatic stress. I usually start making jokes about burnout syndrome and other things because we have really some more important things to do, including flashbacks and everything that is connected with secondary traumatic stress. So I think that we are trying every now and then, at least twice per year, to organize some small education or something, just to repeat and repeat and repeat, to be aware about the problem. And also it's very interesting every time when someone new is coming to women's room, like, you know, during this first conversation, it's very usually this question, okay, could you tell us how you managed to go home without anything and to be whatever. So I very often have the same quote as you put from Sandra Remen, and like expectation to be not touched with everything that we are working all day is the similar like going through the deep water and stay, I don't know the term in English, not wet.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments, any feedback?
Sorry, just one thing. What I said, that we are really trying to have education and everything, it doesn't mean that we are great. I think that because I started working very early, and it was war in Croatia, that I have lots of different sentences, pictures, whatever is needed to just going from sometimes, even though I have a therapy and go through this and everything, but some sentences, especially sentences, are very strong. I was too young, actually, as a young psychologist to deal with everything.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, that's really helpful. Okay, let's kind of move on slightly. So let's focus for a moment on kind of functions of supervision. And again, there's lots of different theories. There's lots of different models that will talk about different functions of supervision. There's functions that align with business models, with social models, with health models. So I'm only going to offer a couple that we can talk about and think about this afternoon. So drawing on Kardashian's, Kardashian broke down the functions into these three main functions. So there's an argument that one of the functions of supervision has to be support for the professional, support for the personal person that's in that room, thinking about the impact of work, thinking about their training needs, and supporting them there. Another key function, because you're a supervisor or manager, because you've been ratified by the organization. You have been given the authority to oversee and manage staff. So there has to be a management function, whether that's ensuring that compliance issues are met, whether that's recording, whether that's number of visits that have been made, all the things that are, whether people are operating according to the law, to the policies. So that's a key part of management. Even signing a leave sheet or a toil sheet might be a key kind of task of that. The other element has to be education. Supervision is a developmental process. People need to experience support in their development needs. What is it that we need to know internally? What is it that we need to know about the world today? Things are changing, new issues are coming in. Something will happen in an organization that we all need to learn about, whether that's a new policy or whether that's the law that surrounds some of the work that we do. So they are key kind of aspects of supervision. And another model that I'm going to draw on is also building on some of those. Thank you, just reading the chat there, thank you. Yes, sorry, Toni Morrison also has a model that focuses on function. And Toni Morrison has built on Kardashian's model, and he's included another function as part of that, and that's the mediation, because he recognizes or stresses that managers are mediators. They are mediators for the organization, so there is a top-down kind of emphasis of that role, but that mediation needs to also happen bottom up. So for example, if there is a new policy in an organization, it'll be a manager's function to let the supervisee know about that policy, help them understand it, think about what it means, and they may also need to have a signature that it's been read and there's compliance been met. But what may happen is that trying to put that policy into practice, the practitioner might think, well, this is not working. It says here you have to do this within 2 days and I'm struggling to manage it, so is my team. So an example of a good manager would be that feedback is offered to the organization. You mediate back to the organization. So there's that kind of key role there. Certainly in the UK, one of the things, key messages for anybody involved in safeguarding work is that it is everybody's responsibility. There is not one single agency that is responsible for this work. So there's an onus to work together. There's an onus to work together with other organizations. And where it works well is when those relationships are well developed. However, there can be dynamics that make it difficult to work together. And again, I cite serious case reviews, practice reviews as a way of learning, where there have been cases where there have been deaths of children or significant incidents. That one of the things that has often got in the way of work together in safeguarding children and protecting women is the dynamics of that relationship has hindered that process, that people aren't working together. That could be about not knowing the other's role, or it could be that there's differences in opinion and views about what's happening here. So it's a manager's role to also have an oversight of those relationships, and if need be, mediate through those relationships, bringing them together and strengthening the focus on the child there. So a kind of a key role there. So what I'd like you to do is to have a think about these functions and just jot down some notes. If you're managers, if you're supervisees, have a think about whether your supervisor is balanced. So it might mean that we do more on one and less on the other. So just have a think about, you know, what percentage of your time do you spend on one function? Which are the one that you're most comfortable with out of those? And which is the one that poses a challenge? And then we'll explore some of the reasons why. So I'm going to give you a moment just to have some reflections and some thinking around that. If you're working alongside somebody, then please have a discussion with them, have a chance to talk about this a little bit more. So I'll give you a few minutes and then I'll invite some feedback. Okay, I'm going to invite some feedback now. Anybody willing to share their focus on any of those functions? Or if you're a supervisee, just reflect on which ones do you experience more? Is it management? Is it support? Is it mediation? Is it education? Feel free to write it in chat if you prefer that. It's like nobody wants to share.
Evo, ja ću da prvo sam pisala sam, a mislim ja više volim ovako da ono što je moje iskustvo jeste da sam dugi niz godina bila supervizantkinja, znači Incest Trauma centar je imao supervizorke iz Holandije i kako je vreme proticalo, ja sam i postala supervizorka. Ono što znam da je meni lično bilo komotnije dok sam bila supervizantkinja. To je nešto što je meni više, hajde, možda je bilo manje ne mislim manje odgovornosti, ali je bila komotnija uloga. Tako da kada sam počela da radim superviziju, to je bilo zapravo sa kolegnicama koje su radile svakodnevno sa decom, prevashodno sa decom i ženama koje su trpele seksualno nasilje i moja uloga jeste bila onaj deo koji, kako se one lično sa tim nose i deo koji je u postupanju vezano za slučaj. Ono što sam ja nastojala u svom radu jeste da, hoću da kažem da kod nas, ne znam sad da li je to negde drugo, ali ovde kod nas u Srbiji, tu je Anita, pa može da, ako želi da se uključi. Uvek se supervizija doživlja kao neka nadmoć, kao neko ko dolazi da vas nadgleda i da vam ukazuje šta vi niste dobro uradili. To je ono što smo mi ovde dugi niz godina u ženskim grupama nastojale da kažemo da to tako ne treba da se radi, nego da je supervizija zapravo pomoć za ono kako se vi osjećate i u onome šta ste uradili, šta ste mogli, šta niste mogli i da možete otvoreno da kažete sa čim ste se suočili kao problemom, šta niste, prevashodno šta niste mogli, šta vas je tu nekako, šta vam je zasmetalo, šta niste mogli. Tako da, ono što mislim da sada radim jeste da kao neko ko je supervizorka nastojim da svoje iskustvo supervizantkinje, mogu kažem da ne zaboravim, ali moja uloga je nešto što je potpuno ravnopravna. Ja sam samo možda neko ko je van te organizacije ili van tog događaja i mogu da sagledam tako nekako sa druge strane. To je nešto što mene vodi u ono što znam da sam opet imala sreću u iskustvu dok sam bila supervizantkinja jeste da su supervizorke bile zapravo osobe od kojih mi u centru jesmo dobijale ovo sve što pričamo, šta nam treba kao supervizija. Sad, znam da to tako se ne, znam od mnogih saradnika iz centara za socijalni rad, recimo, da to nije takav slučaj, da je dolazak supervizije uvek bilo vrlo wow, stižu sada da će da pronađu šta nije bilo dobro, kako nije bilo dobro. Ne mislim bez okrivljavanja, ali sa tim da je biti supervizorka nešto kao neka veća moć u odnosu na osobe koje su supervizantkinje. Eto, to je neko moje iskustvo.
Thank you for sharing that. By all means, it's where we learn from. If we've been supervisees, we take that experience with us. And I'm pleased yours has been a good experience, but for some people that can be a negative experience. So we have to be careful about what is it that we're taking forward and using. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Any other feedback, any comments?
Ja bih da se nadovežem jel me čujete? Sa isto tako utiskom da kod nas nedostaje te podrške u superviziji, odnosno upravo je potrebno da se na superviziji osjećate podržano, da izrazite sve ono što vam je bilo teško, što vam je bilo problem, jer se onda sprečava i taj sindrom sagaranja. A kod nas je to jako retko i nekako ljudi se tu baš nekako ustručavaju da kažu te svoje probleme, a to bi trebalo bude mjesto da svi jedni druge podržimo i zajedno nekako učimo kako da se izborimo s tim.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. So if we are focusing on supporting, if you just bear with me, I'll just bring this slide back up. If we are focusing on supporting people, we are working with the functions of support, and that is absolutely necessary. However, we do have to be mindful that there are other functions. So it's important to think about how do you balance that? You know, yes, it can be an equal relationship, as Liliane has said. However, what will happen if things go wrong? What will happen if you have to criticize somebody for their practice? What you will need then is your management hat. And quite often in services such as ours, where there's a high level of support, the other functions get dropped. So really, you know, it's an opportunity for you to think about, you know, am I fulfilling my responsibilities in all these areas? Which ones do I struggle with? You know, if you're too close to people with a lot of support, then what will that mean for the dynamics of that relationship? Whether we like it or not, a supervisor is in a position of power. That power is ratified by the organization. Alongside that power comes authority. So we can work in a way where there is a shared understanding, but it can never be an equal platform. So there's some of the challenges to working and managing that. When I first became a manager, I really struggled. I was part of a team, and the manager of that team left, and I moved up, and I found that nobody was asking me to go to lunch with them anymore. People would be very quiet when I walked in the room. And it felt like, you know, there was a big shift in what they thought I was, and the dynamics and how they changed. And we had to do a lot of teamwork to build that. So really just for you to kind of reflect and think about, what does this mean for me? Do you have a default position? You know, if I was going to supervision, I would really like it if my manager asked me how I was. I would really like it if she asked me about my personal life, if she got me a cup of tea and we sat down. But if that was happening at every supervision, I wouldn't be learning. I wouldn't have any opportunities for education. I wouldn't feel that my manager can hold me safely, because the dynamics were that we were too much of an equal footing. So I couldn't rely on my manager if I needed something changing or done. So all these dynamics have an impact on that. Yeah. And Anita's just put a message in the chat. Thank you, absolutely. Absolutely, thank you for that feedback. Okay, so moving it on a little bit, you know, do take this away. Think about your functions. One of the things that I did with my supervisees, I did regularly, is we would have a review time. I would invite feedback about how they were experiencing supervision. I would ask, which of the functions do I operate from? What can I do to change? Is this working? So as supervisors, we also have to be open to feedback. We have to be open to challenge and be real with the situation, the circumstances. If we are feeling uncomfortable with being a manager, if we are feeling uncomfortable with the power and authority that comes with it, then we will really struggle managing some of the challenges that come with the role. What if we had to challenge somebody's value base, their biases, their discrimination they may be presenting with? How would we do that if we haven't recognized the power dynamics of that? So you as a manager are a guardian of the organization's values, a guardian of the organization's behaviors. You're a guardian of all those things that you know your service users will need and they will operate from. So if you have staff that are not demonstrating from those positions, then it will involve change. It may involve discipline. It can mean a whole range of things. So we have to embrace all of those functions if we're going to be effective as a manager. So my example of moving from being a team member to a manager was something I struggled to deal with, but also my supervisors struggled to deal with. And I know for me, the thing that I struggled most with the authority and power that came with that relationship. That was a huge struggle. I didn't want it. I didn't want to own it. It felt uncomfortable to be. However, you know, power and authority aren't wrong. they don't need to be difficult if they're used legitimately and they're used in a non-oppressive way, and that the focus of your work is supporting the supervisee to develop and grow in a way that works for them. So one of the things that we know from research is really effective is reflective supervision. There's a saying, and I don't know who the author is, I don't know who said it, but it was that you don't learn from experience, you learn from reflecting on it. Yeah, so we can do something, and there's a real danger that we'll do the same thing again if we've not had a chance to stop, think, why did it that way? What was the learning? Is there any other way that we can do it? So we encourage in our line of work that we have supervision, which is reflective. We know that this offers resilience. We know that this offers compassion. We know that it offers learning and education and progression. And it has to be the way that we deliver things. So I absolutely love this quote. You know, it's not what actually people say. It's not what they do. It's the way that they make you feel that has an impact on you. And that's one of the important things with reflective supervision. It's about relationships. It's about making people feel that they are cared for, that they're valued, and that they're supported. So it's not about all the things that you might bring. It's the way that you approach and you work with people that is meaningful. And that's what people, that's the things that stay with people. Absolutely love this quote by Maya Angelou.
Ja bih samo Zaffira rekla da za moć i autoritet, da naravno da nije, ne da nije loše, nego ako imate moć sa nekim ili za nekoga i autoritet koji ide iz znanja i da vas neko vidi i uči od vas i ono što iskustveno imate, da je to nešto što je super, govorim u odnosu na mnoge naše volonterke koje su bile u centru Tusta Savali. Ja sam bila na neki način supervizorka, ali mi je taj deo bio važan kad govorimo o nekoj ravnopravnosti, da mogu da izgovore kako se osjećaju, koje imaju razmišljenja, koje imaju dileme, a od mene dobiju taj deo šta ja znam, koliko to nudim, da mogu da budem uz njih sa njima. I naravno onaj deo koji je jako važan, kad ste i rukovodilac organizacije na neki način, da kažem da štitite te vrednosti, ali da ako to jeste onda vaše pravo, da ako vidite, spoznate, čujete da je tu neko ko sada se ne uklapa ili jednostavno ne pripada tome, da onda jeste naš zadatak da kažemo ok, sve je u redu, ali ti možda nisi u ovom momentu za taj posao i ovde u ovoj organizaciji. To mislim da na to sam mislila kad govorim o ravnopravnom delu i to je jako teško. Teoretski je lako, ali jako je teško. Meni je u odnosu sa mladim devojkama, mladim ženama to bilo nekako jednostavnije. Neki sam dobar prostor imala i to mi je bila dobra uloga.
Yes, no, that's how I understood when you were describing equality, that's how I understood it, absolutely. And we need that power, we need that legitimate power, we need that legitimate authority if we're going to better support people that are more vulnerable in society and support them. Without that, there would be no movement, no change. What you present as a role model is something that our supervisees, our service users can aspire to. And seeing women in powerful positions and seeing women operating in a fair, compassionate way in those positions is a huge thing to take away from something, huge learning for people as they navigate their way through world, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. So this is just really what reflective supervision is about, this slide. So again, it's a learning process, and it's something that the supervisor engages the supervisee with. And the focus is that they explore the supervisee's practice, a little bit what you were just describing, having a chance to think about what kind of things are influencing them, their emotions, assumptions, the power dynamics, within the organization and within with their clients, to develop a shared understanding of some of the things that are informing their analysis. So, you know, quite often when there's been audits of practice and audits of case reviews, what we found that people move very quickly from experience to action. And the reflection is missing, and the analysis is missing. So we're not learning from those experiences. So it's important that supervision is the time and place where that is facilitated, that people are asked to stop and think about what that might mean. So you may be familiar with Kolb's learning cycle, one of the ones that is widely used in practice in the UK, and underpins all our supervision. In fact, it underpins my practice. It underpins the way that I design training and deliver training, and it underpins my relationships where there's an element of support and education. Most thinkers, great thinkers around reflective supervision, will say that people, if supervision is going to be effective, people need to be taken through this process, that their experiences are talked about. So they're able to describe what's happened. They're able to give you a context, paint a picture of what they saw, what was happening. And then that they're encouraged to think about what that might feel like. What are the strong feelings there? What are the beliefs? What are the behaviors that you noticed there? And then moving into analyzing that. What is it that you know? Why do you feel like that? What is it that's pushing you to think like that, to feel like that? Taking it out wider to think about the dynamics of relationships, the roles and authority, and then before we move into action, thinking about what does that mean for us now? What do we need to do differently? And then move into formulating a plan as a follow-up process. So I gave the example earlier on about a colleague that was dismissed from the service because of the record she made. If she had been supported through Kolb, what could have happened is that, first of all, she would have been given time to talk about what that visit was. Why did you go to see the family? What is it that we were worried about as an organisation? And hopefully that would have given her an opportunity to just talk about that experience. And then if she was prompted to think about how did that visit impact on her, and that there was trust in the relationship, that there was a sense that the space is hers, that she won't be judged by what she's sharing, she may have talked about how that triggered things for her, how that challenged her belief about what her childhood was like, how that, that feeling that she had in her tummy, that feeling of sickness, of tightness, was incongruent with her thoughts at that time. And a chance to talk through those would have then pushed us into the opportunity to explore those a little bit more. What is it that we know? What are the symptoms of trauma that are impacting on you? What are the triggers? What is your role and how it might impact on the... And then we move on to begin a plan of action. And that might have been that the case is taken off her because it's too close. It could have been that every time she visited, she was supported by a co-worker. Or it could be a whole range of things. But because we know what the issue is, there's a chance to talk about it, reflect on it, explore the reasons why that was happening. We're in a better position to make a plan around it. This is why this particular model supports reflective supervision, and that's why it's effective. As I said earlier, in most organisations where they've been audited, what the files have shown and the recording has shown is that people will talk about the experience. This is what I did, this is what time I went, this is who was there if it was a home visit, and then move into action. Next time I go, I will do this and I will do that. And there's no chance for reflection and no chance for analysis. The analysis is critical because sometimes in our work, we can experience feelings more powerfully, whether it's what we observe, a child or young person who's experienced abuse may present that they're okay. They may tell you, I've got no problem, I'm absolutely fine. But you may experience that they're quite nervous when they say it, or they're quite uneasy when they say it. So there's a chance to talk about that incongruence, those things that don't quite fit, those things that make us feel uncomfortable, uncertain, unsure. There's scope to explore some of those in this way if a reflective model of supervision is adopted. And what we know from people's practice experience and supervision, that this has had a powerful impact on their practice. It has helped develop them and help improve practice. And just a slide to pull all this together, and this is described as a 4x4 model of supervision that Toni Morrison initially developed, and when he passed away, Winnicott kind of continued. So in this model, the service users are at the heart of the business, the supervision. The focus should always be on the practice, on the service user, whether that's a child or the woman that we're working with. And then people are taken through Kolb's experiential cycle to support an emphasis on the particular case. So talk about it, reflect on it, analyze it, and plan for action. If your supervision is supported by the reflective cycle, you will inevitably be using all of your functions for supervision. There will be an element of development, there will be an element of support, there will be an element of mediation, and there will be an element of management. So it's a way that you can utilize all those particular functions. So if this is something that you'd find useful, I would encourage you to have a read, have a practice, and think about how you might encourage reflective supervision. So I've come to the end of my presentation in a timely way. So I just wanted to invite the opportunity for any questions, any comments. And just say a big thank you to you all for giving up your time to be here, spend time with me and for each other. And hopefully see you again, but if I don't, I really wish you well with the work that you do with women and children in your services. But thank you.
Zafira, hvala puno. Ono što je danas bilo jeste taj spoj prakse i teorije, kako kažemo, i hvala na tome što ste podelili sa nama ono kako ste vi prolazili kroz superviziju i kako ste kao supervizorka sa čim ste se sve nosili. Mislim da nam je to bilo, da je to bilo ono što je najvažnije da čujemo ovde i da pretpostavljam da svako od nas koja je ili supervizorka ili supervizantkinja tako složila sebi u glavi šta radi, šta još može da uradi i veliko hvala na ovom predavanju danas. Mislim da imamo u chatu još, da, ovde su Zahvaljujuš se I to je to.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for everybody who contributed and appreciated the training. I do hope that it's been useful and that you can take this away to improve the services that we offer for children and families. So take care, everybody. I'll let you leave and get on with your journeys, but thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Hvala Zafira puno. Hvala svima. Pozdrav za sve.
Pozdrav. Doviđenja.
Doviđenja.
Much bye.
Take care then, and we'll be in touch.
Yes.
Naravno, naravno. Ćao svima.
Can I just thank the interpreters for their really valuable and excellent service? You know, I couldn't have connected and reached with people in the way that I have without their support. So thank you, both of you. Take care. Bye.
Takođe, prijetno svima. Zdravo.